This is Dream Power Radio, the place where your dreams turn into reality. Here is your host, Debbie Spector-Weissman.
Hello, 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 and welcome to Dream Power Radio on the amazing Women and Men of Power Network, the world's leading positive programming network, powered by Raven International. I'm your host, Debbie Spector-Weissman, the Dream Coach. This is a show where we talk about dreams, both daytime and nighttime dreams. Now, you can use them to make the internal shift to a life you love and rediscover the truth of who you really are. One of my favorite activities when I'm out and about is observing people, what they're wearing, how they're walking, and interacting with others. But sadly, over the years I've been doing this, there's something else I couldn't help but notice. Americans are getting fatter. And it appears this feeling I have is backed up by actual study. Study after study has shown that we're in an obesity epidemic. On average, we weigh more and have larger waists than we did a generation ago. And it appears this trend is continuing. The question is, why? Is it the food we eat, our sedentary lifestyles, or are there other issues at play? My guest today, Tricia Nelson, believes that one culprit is that we eat to satisfy our emotional cravings. Tricia is an internationally acclaimed author, transformational speaker, and emotional eating expert. She's the author of the best-selling book, Heal Your Hunger, 7 Simple Steps to End Emotional Eating Now, and the host of the podcast, The Heal Your Hunger Show. Welcome to Dream Power Radio, Tricia.
Thank you so much.
Oh, it is my pleasure because it's such an important subject. And
you bet.
Tricia, I know your interest in food actually began with your own eating issues. So can you tell us what happened to you when you realized that you were eating to cope with the stresses in your life?
Yes, absolutely. I had no idea I was an emotional eater. Honestly, I just thought I liked food. I did. I like to cook. I like to eat. I like to serve it to other people. I like to go out to dinner, so food is a big highlight for me. And I didn't think there was anything wrong with that until I started gaining weight. And by age 20, I was 50 pounds overweight, and I hated being overweight. I had this roll on my tummy that I would scrunch up in my hands and imagine cutting off, like you cut fat off the side of a steak. I had thoughts like, oh, maybe I'll get a disease where I'd automatically lose weight without having to diet, or maybe I'll join the army and I'll be forced to exercise at boot camp. I mean, some pretty crazy thoughts. And it was really because no matter what diet I tried, I'd fail at it. So of course I had some success in the beginning. You're always like, you go on a diet, you're like, I'm doing it, I'm working out, feeling good, eating healthy. And, people are starting to comment. So you're looking good, you're feeling good. But after a couple weeks, it's about all it took for me. Things would get hard, like they'd get really hard. And I'd feel like I can't do this anymore. This is like, I can't sustain this. And sure enough, I'd go back to my old ways and put the weight back on. And I had about 5 different sizes of pants in my closet as a result, because I never knew what size I'd be. And I was a yo-yoer. I'd be up 30, down 20, up 10. So it was very discouraging, Debbie. It made me feel bad about myself. I would tell myself pretty mean things like, you're such a loser, why can't you get control? And my binges got worse. And so at some point, I just felt like I can't keep doing this. Like I can't keep dieting and failing. And thankfully, I met somebody who showed me how to address and heal the underlying causes of emotional eating. That was so key for me because I wasn't stupid. I knew pizzas were probably not as healthy as salads. And so berries were probably healthier than brownies, but I couldn't follow through on what I knew. And so it was really the emotional eating part that is what I needed to address. So that changed everything for me. And thankfully I've been in a thin body ever since. And I codified what I did and what I still do. I still practice what I preach. And so I put it in a system, a very simple system that I share with people, and it makes all the difference. And it takes the guesswork out of it, takes the mystery out of it, and it's very doable. Not to say it's easy, but it's simple, and that's really, really important. So I'm very blessed to be able to do what I do, and I'm super happy to be here sharing it with you.
So getting a handle on your emotional issues actually made you feel good, and feeling good resulted in your looking good, and then looking good reinforced your self-image. So you kind of created a positive loop for yourself there, didn't you?
No question, but I had to really look at my emotional connection with food, because I would use food for all different kinds of emotions. It was really my go-to. It was my primary coping tool. And so I had to have a whole new set of tools. And I think that's why 98% of all diets fail, and why we do have such an increase and really abysmal statistic around obesity. I mean, literally almost 50% of our nation is overweight or obese. And so it's really, and it is getting worse every single year. But I think it's because people keep trying to diet without addressing that emotional connection with food, and without having new coping tools. I mean, diets just tell you what to take out of your diet. They just tell you what to eat, but they don't tell you how to cope when you don't have those foods anymore as your go-to, as your comfort, as your source of entertainment, as your companion, and so that's really what people need to do is find new ways to deal with stress and new ways to lessen stress, because stress plays a big part of it. But yeah, that makes all the difference.
Yeah. So how do you define emotional eating?
It's really, to me, it's anesthetizing our feelings with food. It's stuffing feelings with food when we feel uncomfortable. And it's not, I think a lot of people don't imagine themselves as emotional eaters, and probably think like I thought, which is, hey, I just like food, because it is so unconscious. But it really is, it's a habit for sure, but it's a habit of just numbing out uncomfortable feelings. And when we do it and it becomes a habit, it's just what we do, and so people are like, I'm not killing feelings. I just like food. But, my clients really start to take a good look at it and start seeing, there is an emotional connection there. And it's really, everybody does it. Okay. So I don't feel like I like to indict everybody and just say, hey, we're all emotional eaters. We all have, we're meant to have an emotional connection with food. Think of a mother breastfeeding her child. It's meant to be an emotional experience, and foods are meant to be comforting. But it's really a spectrum, I think. And where you are on the emotional eating spectrum is determined by two things. One is the level of control you have to pull back. Okay. So do you have control if you gain a little bit extra weight around the holiday time, or, go on a cruise and eat and drink too much, and you come home, you're like, I'm going to jog this off, cut out sweets, and boom, you lost that little bloat. That's somebody with a lot of control, versus on the high end of the spectrum, somebody who is eating healthy for a while and then pitches a binge, goes and eats something unhealthy, and then it turns into something else unhealthy, and then they feel crappy, and then they're like, screw it. Like, I'm just not going to bother, and then it's 2 weeks or a month of unhealthy eating. That's somebody with not too much control, obviously. And also the other way to know where you are on that spectrum is by the number of consequences that you have. So control and consequences. And, somebody who gains 5 pounds on a cruise, that's not a lot of consequences, versus somebody who's been dieting, gaining and losing for decades, which a lot of my clients have. They have joint pain, they have joint replacements, they have arthritis, they have, diabetes or pre-diabetes, metabolic syndrome. The consequences get greater and greater the longer you beat your body up with unhealthy foods and, yo-yo dieting. And not only the physical, but the depression, anxiety, no libido, low self-esteem. There's so many different ways that it affects us that we don't even think about, because we kind of just live with it, and so there's a lot of consequences as you get up on the higher end of that spectrum. And it's really, on the high end of the spectrum is really more food addiction. And I actually have a quiz on my website, which helps people know where they are on that spectrum. They can take the quiz and they get a personalized score.
Right. So when people do come to grips with their stress and have a handle on their stress, Does that make it easier for them to eat healthy, or is it more involved than that?
It's more involved than that, because who gets a handle on their stress? so, you got to really be intentional about it. So my experience is there's a lot of stress that we don't realize we play a part in creating. And so I have, in my book, I write about the anatomy of the emotional eater. And these are 24 personality traits that make up the emotional eater's personality. We're a certain kind of person, and we've been practicing habits that have nothing to do with food that actually create the stress that we stress eat over. So you can't just say, oh, I'm going to just have less stress in my life, because these patterns are so ingrained, we don't even know we're doing it. So an example of one of these traits is people pleasing. And emotional eaters are consummate people pleasers. And I was the worst offender. And so why are emotional eaters people pleasers? Well, we tend to, as children, have trauma in our lives. Perhaps we have alcoholism or drug addiction in our family, abuse of some kind. Not always. I mean, I had a pretty good childhood, but we have these patterns when we're young of trying to mitigate circumstances like having an alcoholic parent by being do-gooders, right? And we're going to take care of all the other kids. So we're good caretakers, but we're also people pleasers. And we learn to be chameleons and change ourselves to try to make people happy, and also take on other people's jobs, do extra credit work, or take on projects, host parties, be the designated driver. We do all these different things hoping to get, atta girls. And it works. I mean, we do to a degree, but never as much as we want, right? So when I was trying to seek that validation from outside myself and kind of knocking myself out to get it, I was not only burned out, but I was sort of resentful, because when you do everybody else's job, you start to get resentful. But that resentment and being burned out constantly pushing yourself to please, that sets you up to overeat and to need more energy from food. And so that's an example, Debbie, of a trait where we create our own stress. We don't have boundaries in our time. We're caretakers. We take on other people's problems. There's so many traits that have nothing to do with our eating patterns. And yet, they do create that stress. So I often tell people it's not really an eating problem. It's more of a living problem. And so, yes, we need to start pulling back, setting boundaries on our time, learning the word no. Not an easy thing for an emotional eater to say no, let somebody else do it. But these are things we need to do. And again, why diets are so lacking, because they don't teach us these living skills. Diets don't help us change how we're living so that we can change how we're eating. But back to the comment about finding balance and have less stress in our lives, no question, self-care is at the top of the list of how we can change. Meditation, prayer, reading spiritual literature, going for walks, picking up the phone and talking to a girlfriend, getting our oxytocin levels up. These are things that can also help us de-stress. And when we do de-stress, we do eat less.
It does make a lot of sense there. And on that note, we're going to take a short break here. We are talking about emotional eating with author and speaker Tricia Nelson, and we'll be right back.
When is a car not a car?
When it shows up in your dreams. Cars are one of the most common dream symbols. If you don't know why you're dreaming about cars or any image, it can leave you confused or scared. But that dream could be a solution to a pressing problem, or an insight into a solution that's been bugging you for years. Go to my website and sign up for a complimentary discovery session, and I'll help you understand why a dream is a terrible thing to waste.
Go to thedreamcoach.net for more information.
Welcome back to Dream Power Radio with your host, Debbie Spector-Weissman.
Yes, welcome back to Dream Power Radio. I'm your host, Debbie Spector-Weissman, and we're talking about emotional eating with Tricia Nelson. Well, Tricia, you talked about one of the traits that people have who end up being emotional eaters. Can you give us another one?
Oh yeah, there's a lot. As I said, 24. I won't do all 24 today. I know we don't have time, but another one is having a racing mind. So emotional eaters tend to not only overeat, but overthink. So my mind was so busy. Like, oh my gosh, like, do I look okay? Do I sound okay? What did she mean by that? Why did he look at me that way? You know, what do they think of me? A lot of what do they think about me? Mark Twain said, you wouldn't be nearly so concerned about what people think of you if you realize how seldom they do. But nevertheless, that's a lot of what took up my thoughts. Constantly sort of evaluating myself and how I came across. And I was trying so hard to please, people please. But this racing mind makes us really tired. It makes us tired. It saps our energy. And the problem with it is it doesn't ever shut up. That's why we're so drawn to carbs and sugar, heavy foods, because those heavy foods kind of put a blanket on that racing mind. It sort of calms us down, stops the spin, you know? And so again, this is why we need to find new ways to deal with that racing mind. This is why meditation is so helpful. And I'll have people say to me, oh, I can't meditate. My mind's too busy. And I'm like, well, that's kind of the point, you know? So, so if you're expecting your mind to not be busy, give it up. You know, even if your mind goes from 50,000 miles an hour to 20,000 miles an hour, hey, that's some major progress. Anything we can do, writing, journaling, getting our thoughts down on paper. People are like, I don't have time for that. But honestly, we have to do something because it just seems to be the way for emotional eaters is that we overthink everything. And so there are definitely things we can do, talking, kind of getting our thoughts out of our head, getting that squirrel out of the cage. These are things that can help us as well. But it's definitely a trait that we have, this overthinking. We're also oversensitive. So, you know, emotional eaters are not only overeaters, but we're overfeelers. And we also are very hard on ourselves. And so we beat ourselves up. We're constantly scrutinizing what I said. Did I say it right? And boy, it's like we run ourselves ragged. No wonder we have to sit on the couch with chips and dip. We have to quiet things down. And so this is why we do have to really take pains to find new ways to deal with the way our minds work, and also to get off our own case. Eating is really, there are three primary drivers. Let me introduce you to the PEP test. And PEP is an acronym. And this is to explain, because we already know what food does to us, but this is what it does for us. Okay, so the first PEP, the first P stands for painkiller. So we use food to anesthetize pain, as I had mentioned. You know, what kind of pain? All kinds of pain. You know, we're in a job that doesn't fit us anymore. We're in a relationship that's got struggles. You know, we're having financial stress. There's a parent that's sick that we have to take care of, a kid that's dysregulated. So there's plenty of pain to go around, but we tend to use food to just kind of ease the pain, to take off the edge, you know, to soften the edges of life. And it's, you know, this is how we end up obese, is it's like a little at a time, taking the edge off, but that adds up because we usually don't take the edge off with salads. Okay. It's usually heavier foods, sugar, carbs, and fat, my three favorite food groups. Okay. So basically this is why we have to find new ways to deal with our feelings. The E in PEP stands for escape. Because as I said, when we're overthinking everything, it's like we want out of our head. It's like, give me a break from my head. And this is why we tend to use food. Again, the heavier foods, that we get the serotonin hit from the carbohydrates, processed carbs. And so we use food as a form of escape. And the last P in PEP stands for punishment. And we use food as a form of punishment. Again, because like I mentioned, we're really hard on ourselves, you know? So even though we initially think, I'm going to reward myself with these yummy foods, I'm going to stop at the store, get my favorite food, sit in front of my favorite TV show, you know, and just veg out. There is a built-in punishment. And when we go overboard, when we end up stuffing ourselves and feeling really crappy and mad at ourselves, well, then all those negative thoughts, self-criticism ensue. And it's like, wait, that wasn't a reward. That was actually more like a punishment. And sure enough, we do punish ourselves with food, and it hurts, it hurts. So there's this built-in, again, painkiller, escape, and punishment. Those are the three ways that we really use food. Again, totally unconscious. We're not going to say, oh, I'm going to beat myself up with food now. No, I'm going to reward myself. But unconsciously, we are seeking these things through the foods that we eat. So I introduced that PEP test. So people who are kind of like, this is, a new idea for me, this emotional eating. Next time you go to the refrigerator, time and time again, like I would go like 5 times of an evening. I just get up, walk to the refrigerator, open the door. And it's like, I don't know what I expected to show up there, but I was always looking for something, and people can start asking themselves, what's really going on? Am I looking to kind of numb out? And what are those feelings I'm numbing out?
Yeah. And it seems to me that the whole concept of having self-esteem issues also play a big factor. Because if you're not feeling good about yourself, that is one way to reward yourself. And then you punish yourself for feeling that, and then the guilt steps in, and you have that. Just like I was talking before about you having this positive loop, you end up having this negative loop that plays over and over.
100%. Yeah. And it works, it's like you beat yourself up, you feel worse, so you beat yourself up, then you feel worse. It definitely goes in that negative direction as well, and it's hard to get out of it on your own. And I think that's one of the important things for people to know is that there's no shame in getting help with your eating. We tend to think, I hear women tell me all the time, like, oh, I should be able to handle this. Like I should be able to pull myself up by the bootstraps and get over this. But we're talking about one of the hardest addictive habits to overcome because we have to eat. It's not like alcohol where you can just put the plug in the jug. Like you have to take the tiger out of the cage 3 times a day, trying to pet the kitty and then put it back in the cage without getting your backside torn off. So it's not easy. It means that we have to deal with our emotions. Otherwise they will deal with us. It definitely takes some intention, but it takes getting help from outside of your head. Like we need a voice that's louder than our own minds, because we'll always talk ourselves into eating. And when it is one of the hardest addictive habits that we've probably had longer than any other addictive habit, chances are we're going to need some help with it. So people don't have any issue with hiring a trainer to work out and make sure they do their workouts and have accountability there. People in sports have no issues hiring a coach so they can be at top of their game. But somehow to hire a coach to get help with my eating, oh, that's embarrassing or shameful. It's not. You're dealing with, if you want to master it, you're probably not going to get there on your own.
That makes total sense. In prepping for this show, and I knew you were going to have come on, I was thinking about this because I never really considered myself having weight issues. But back at the beginning of the pandemic, when everything closed down and I was spending, way too much time at home and not having enough to do, I found myself eating more than usual. And all of a sudden I looked down at the scale and I found out I weighed more than I ever weighed in my entire life. And I was trying to think about my own, like what was going on here. And I realized that I was really eating out of boredom. So would that be considered emotional eating as well?
Well, in my book, boredom, it looks like boredom and it sounds like boredom and it feels like boredom, but it's actually being uncomfortable with being. Okay. So overeaters are also overdoers. And we tend to run circles around everybody. If you want something done, give it to an emotional eater because we're constantly on the go, constantly doing. And when we stop doing, that's when the thoughts come, that's when we're just sort of stuck with ourselves. And if we've never really slowed down long enough to be with ourselves, we tend to eat more. I like to kind of qualify boredom by saying, hey, it's more just a lack of doing and a lack of distraction from what's going on inside. And when we don't have the right tools to start kind of doing that inner evaluation, we can start numbing more when we're not super busy. So I have kind of a different spin on it, but I do hear that a lot. People say, oh, I eat because I'm bored. And that's partly because it's a habit. And let's face it, eating is fun and it's easy to do. And everybody's pushing food. It's not like drugs where you're doing it in some dark corner. It's like everywhere you go, there's food and everybody's, celebrating with food. So it takes a lot of intention and awareness and community. My experience, again, is that we need a lot of support to not indulge, to not just mindlessly eat. I mean, it really takes getting conscious, and being a part of a community of emotional eaters is really helpful as well. So you feel like you're locking arm in arm with other people who have the same goal of cleaning up their eating and being healthier. Our minds are with us 24/7, and they have a captive audience. Our minds, which are negatively programmed, they have a captive audience, and for 24 hours a day, they're feeding us a lot of crap, a lot of negative messages, and a lot of like, what's the point? What's the use? You might as well eat that. It's too cold to go outside and exercise. I mean, constant. And that's why we have to really find sources of strength and positive messages from outside of us so we can learn how to make better decisions for ourselves. But if we just leave it up to willpower, I mean, we're kind of dead in the water.
Speaking of having solutions, there are so many diets out there. It seems like there's a new one every year. I mean, there's keto, paleo, Mediterranean,
right,
whatever. Is there a good diet?
Well, I mean, if you boil them down, they're really not a whole lot different. I mean, really, and diets are sexy, right? It's like, I'm going to do the new diet and I'm going to master this, but they're pretty, they all simplified. Eat good vegetables, eat lots of greens, eat some fruit. And nowadays is the new evil, not fat. Now we know that fat is no longer, we don't have to eat non-fat everything anymore. Fats are good for our brains. We need some cholesterol. So healthy fats, avocado oil and olive oil and different things like that. But sugar is now the thing. So yeah, I mean, vegetables, some fruit, and healthy proteins. It's kind of what it boils down to, maybe some slow metabolizing carbs, especially if you're somebody who works out. So that's kind of what they all boil down to. They have variations, but to me, it's, especially for emotional eaters, we use it as a diet hack. We're constantly trying to hack the system, and we're the worst offenders. I mean, we're constantly going on diets thinking we're very trained to have a quick fix mentality. Like, I want to just fix my weight problem. And if you really take a look at your track record, you've been trying to get a quick fix for decades. That is not a quick fix, So I say stop dieting. Even the ones that have these amazing science around it, intermittent fasting. It's like, eat 3 meals with nothing in between. Stop snacking, and you're going to cut out 50% of the unhealthy foods that you eat, because snacky foods are always, sugar, fat, and carbs. And so eat 3 meals with nothing in between. If you want to put 12 hours between your dinner and your breakfast for a little bit of intermittent fasting benefit, great. But don't starve yourself. Don't go too long where you feel like you're starving and end up overcompensating, because then you've gotten nowhere. If not back, you're going backwards. But really start addressing the emotional eating. Like, that will get you so much further. I mean, my clients don't diet. I get them off the diet track altogether. So they're not focused on the food. They're not obsessed with food and what to eat and ketones and all that stuff. But instead, they're starting to get to know themselves, their emotions. They're starting to stand up for themselves, speak their mind instead of stuffing everything down. They're getting so much better at self-care. And in the process, they're losing weight without even focusing on it. So to me, that's the best solution.
Well, Tricia, I have so many more questions to ask you, but we're out of time. I just have one final one. How can people find out more about you and your work?
I recommend starting with the quiz on my website. It's healyourhunger.com, HEAL, healyourhunger.com. You can access my book through there. There's a link to my book and my podcast, The Heal Your Hunger Show. And I would love to connect with anybody who's ready to start dealing with emotional eating and having a better, happier, healthier life.
Oh, well, Tricia, thank you so much for being on Dream Power Radio today.
Thanks for having me.
We've been speaking with emotional eating expert Tricia Nelson. I hope you've enjoyed today's program. If you have, please tell all your friends, follow me, and drop a positive review on your podcast site. Until next time, this is Debbie Spector-Weissman saying, sweet dreams, everybody.
You've been listening to Dream Power Radio with your host, Debbie Spector-Weissman. For more information on Debbie or to sign up for her newsletter, go to dreampowerradio.com. This has been Dream Power Radio on the amazing Women and Men of Power Network, the world's leading positive programming network, powered by Raven International.